cause, but we have a dysfunctional policy and practice. We are giving detainees, a promise to appear in an immigration court, and the detainees are interpreting that as a permission to enter the country. And who would you believe if you're in Central America and you receive a phone call? Would you believe the government advertisement, or would you believe your relative's phone call who said, I'm now receiving my permission to enter the United States? So I think the word-of-mouth advertising is being more effective, but I am thankful that they are telling people not to come and why, and it's a very dangerous journey. Many of the children were said, about 90% of the girls that came, and some of the staff at Los Fresnos told us, were sexually assaulted. Yes, some on the way, but many of them in their own homeland by relatives, neighbors, and they were fleeing those areas. Some of the dysfunctionality comes out here is we're not really checking to see that the relatives that we're releasing these children to are legal. And I'm concerned about the adequacy, especially when we're overwhelmed for medical screenings. And this is very ironic. The background checks, just a moment, take 2 years for legal entry into the country, but just take a few days for an illegal entry. Yes, sir.
I was going to ask, how are they defining relatives? What is a relative?
Well, yes, Kathy.
It's anyone who is directly related to the child, or they're turning them over to friends of the family, anybody that they can identify that has a connection to the family. At last case resort, it would be a foster family type.
And these are for children primarily from north of Central America, but a few from Mexico, that they're seeking to establish that they're fleeing terrible situations, that they have credible fear. I'm sorry. And one other thing I failed to mention is that we are repatriating same-day Mexicans that come across the border illegally. Hang on with me, man. Didn't work yet. Try again.
Thank you.
That's Apple. I don't take credit for that. Are we there? Okay. Anyway, some of the other dysfunctionality is that we, of course, end up providing K through 12 education for many of these children, and then they're not allowed to get a driver's license. And then if we use E-Verify, they won't be allowed to get a job. We have a very dysfunctional system. And furthermore, we attract illegal entry by providing a lot of free stuff. And that's not my words. Those are the words of people I interview along the border. One of the ways we do that is by creating a vacuum for workers by paying Americans not to work for almost 2 years. We need to change that. Now, our Constitution basically, though not as clearly as you might think, shows that this is a federal issue. Clearly in Article 1, Section 8 establishes that the federal government shall establish a uniform rule of naturalization. But then it deals with Article 1, Section 8 prohibited the federal government from prohibiting the states from admitting, of course at that time mainly slaves, from entering the country. The importation of slaves, but also uses the word migration. Showed that the states did have some concurrent jurisdiction with respect to immigration, at least at that time, and that the role of the federal government was to prohibit. They couldn't prohibit until 1808. Anyway, there are a couple of recent laws or acts in order that have been affecting the situation. One that was passed under President Bush in 2008. It's called the William Wilberforce Human Trafficking Law, and that allows people that establish credible fear that they're seeking asylum, that we won't just turn them back to their predators, but that we'll seek to find that out, verify it, and find a better remedy. The other recent order that's affecting this is President Obama's executive order that under certain circumstances, people who qualify are not allowed or not forced to be deported from the country. And I don't have enough time or knowledge really to speak a whole lot about that right now. But that's really what's been causing the present, affecting what's going on now. The difference, of course, between President Bush and President Obama, one was passed by Congress pretty much unanimously and signed by the President, and the other policy practice has been ordered by the Chief Executive Officer of our country, the President. There is a bill that I think goes a long way in addressing the issue. I'm not going to have time to get into it now. It's authored by our Senator Cornyn, of course a Republican, and a Democrat from the border of Laredo who has spoken with Congressman Cuellar. It addresses determining the legal status of these people immediately and not just trying to get rid of the promise to appear issue and allowing people to de facto really to disappear into our country. And I believe it speaks about adequate medical screening, and it also talks about employing the National Guard for certain purposes, not really military purposes, but to support law enforcement along the border, humanitarian relief, etc. Quickly, here's some ideas that I have for federal reform that I've thought about. First of all, we need to reduce the government freebies, which are many, at least for some people. Then we need to lower the restrictions for legal immigration and to facilitate law-abiding migrant workers. And I believe we should require legal status before we give someone birthright citizenship. And we also need to continue to increase law enforcement. The Border Patrol admits they need at least 700 more now. And that's one of the reasons why I think, though it's regrettably that we had to do it and the governor had to call for it, but the National Guard will help the Border Patrol, who 40% of them now are basically processing children and families. From the bottom working up, we need to give greater access to those federally protected lands. We need to, I'm going to move this so I don't lose it. We need to keep in custody the detainees until we've actually determined credible fear, and make sure the people that we are releasing them to are not predators as well. We need to increase the number of immigration judges. We need to have swift hearings for the unaccompanied minors and family units. As far as state reform, probably the biggest thing that we've thought of with my office is requiring, before the children are allowed in our schools, to make sure that they comply with the federal promise to appear, and that they have legal status before they come to our schools. And of course, there's things we could do here in the state to reduce freebies for all. And North Carolina has done some of that. I'm seeking to study that legislation. I think there are a few things we can do on this issue as a state, though it's mainly a federal problem. Before I conclude and open this up, I just want to give a little bit of perspective that sometimes is missing. The scripture says in Proverbs 14, verse 28, that in the multitude of a people is a king's honor, but in the lack of a people is the downfall of a prince. The greatness of our country is not just our natural resources, our oil and gas, etc., but it's our people. We have a lot of people actually renouncing more than ever their citizenship. And we have a declining birth rate in our country, 0.7%, that is not sustainable. Back in World War II, when we were fighting a desperate war on two continents, in Europe and in the Pacific Ocean, we didn't have many people to harvest the crops. and we allowed, and we are grateful for migrant workers that are shown pictured here coming to work in South Texas. I took this picture of a slide presentation at the Palo Alto Battlefield National Park. I think we need to realize that people are important. We need to treat them humanely, and that there is a place to come legally. Other principles to consider that I've thought about, mercy and truth. Not just justice, mercy and truth preserve a king. And by loving kindness he upholds his throne, Proverbs 20:28. And then in Deuteronomy 10, in verse 18 and 19, and these aren't to be applied ipso facto directly to us. We are not Israel. We are not a theocracy. I want to make that very plain. But I do think there's principles of equity we can gain from the Scriptures here. And they're, God says himself that he administers justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, and giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then in Leviticus 19, he says, and if the stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you, shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. So what are the broad principles that I hold to? Well, first of all, I do think we need to secure and control the border. But I do think we need to avoid both extremes of closing the border, period, or making it completely open for anyone to come. I do not want to become like the Soviet Union and build a Berlin Wall where we wall people in and wall people out. I believe in enforcement of the laws and the rule of law. But I also believe in freedom of travel and work. And we need to distinguish in our laws between serious crimes and lesser violations of order. There should be equal justice for the citizen and non-citizen. And we shouldn't reward violations of order, put them to the front of the line. I don't believe in amnesty. Then again, I don't believe in treating someone who's crossed an international border necessarily as a murderer or a thief. Think what you would do if your children were going to be raped by your uncle or your neighbor. What law would you violate? If you were running out of a burning building, and would you pay attention to the crosswalk? Probably not. You just get across the street, you explain it to the judge. So I'm not justifying breaking of the law, but it's different than throwing a brick through a window and stealing property out of a store. And I do think there's a place, there always has been, for asylum in the United States from those fleeing violence and murder. And I do think there should be a legal path for naturalization or citizenship. And I'd like to conclude this before I open it up with this perspective. We are a nation of immigrants. Most of us can trace that ourselves. Our families came here. As one person, when I asked them, why are these immigrants coming? They said, for 3 reasons. For hope. For hope. For hope. Now there are some coming to be dependent upon the government. But if we note the tablet that's in this Lady Liberty's hands there, it has inscribed upon it July 4th. It's a hope for most people of what we enjoy. Opportunity, freedom, but most of all, independence. And I do think we need to preserve that. And as we emphasize the necessity of border security and national security, at the same time to remember that a people make us great. And a lot of good has come from those who've been hardworking, God-fearing, and who've obeyed the laws, and who make up this country, and from whose stock we've come from. Well, anyway, at this point, I would like to open it up. Here's a list of informal interviews. I'm not going to go through those, but those will be online. And I'm going to ask Kathy C. Michael has the microphone, And I know some of y'all are going to probably get here somewhere. If y'all, I'm going to try to answer these best I can. Go ahead, Michael.